Ladies and gentlemen, this is hilarious. Bill Gates' social media companies should eventually allow Trump back. He's referring primarily to Twitter. Trump was banned from Twitter last month following, Facebook temporarily suspended Trump. And Bill Gates said, quote, "I think at some point he probably will be allowed back on and probably should be allowed back on," Gates told CNBC. This is the Hill, and this would be the absolute worst thing for President Trump. They did him and 74 million supporters of President Trump an enormous favor. And I don't say this because I don't say this in the same tone or with the same kind of motivation that people who obsess over his tweets. I don't say this from the vantage point of a detractor. I voted for President Trump. I oppose the Lincoln Project. That's why one of the reasons you vote for President Trump. You oppose the Lincoln Project. And we see how despicable one of the co-founders and perhaps others in that organization have been, or alleged to have been. But you vote for President Trump because of accomplishments. He had record low unemployment for most of his tenure. This is a fact. The pandemic and the economic impact was not his fault. He doesn't run California or New York, which is a great percentage of the country's GDP. He doesn't run democratic states that tanked their economies. That's not his fault. He wanted to open up the economy a long time ago. Can't blame. So you have these imbeciles who are like, "Oh, he left us with the worst economy." It's like, well, that's not his. What? He's not a governor of the Democratic-run states of this country have the highest unemployment rates. Go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Much higher than red states. Why is that? So I'm not going to get into, you can easily refute all the nonsense from people who have derangement issues pertaining to Trump. Easily. Go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, go to the New York Times, and look at the aggregate number of lives lost in the pandemic. You see what's taking place with New York's governor right now, and investigations. All you had to do was allow Democrats to govern, and they implode. You have a deputy press secretary resigned. It hasn't even been a month yet. Tomorrow will be a month. You had the Lincoln Project completely now disgraced beyond belief. A deputy press secretary went after a Politico reporter, and that would have been the biggest story for weeks if it was Trump's administration. You're talking about the most duplicitous and disingenuous people. Hypocrites. They're impervious, though, to hypocrisy. And what else? Second acquittal. Then you have Andrew Cuomo. And everyone is finally realizing what we've been all saying for a long, long time. New York had the worst, New Jersey, Phil Murphy, had the worst outcomes because of those two individuals. Not because of Trump. But hit subscribe to this channel right now. Oh, and by the way, be here at around 6 p.m., 6:30 p.m. this evening for my live stream. I've started them up again. I'm going to do them a lot earlier. We had a lot of fun yesterday and the day before. It's awesome. We have a lot of fun. Be there at 6:30 p.m. or 6 p.m. tonight for the live stream. You will love it. And if you want to support my voice long term, my Patreon is below. If you want to read my writing in The Hill, the Huffington Post, Salon, the Jerusalem Post, the Roanoke Times, the Federalist. That's on hagoodman.com. You can see my debates. And again, if you want to support my voice via Patreon, thank you. To my new Patreons, thank you so very, very much. President Trump on Twitter did nothing for himself, or let's put it this way. Twitter was not beneficial to President Trump when he became president. It might have helped him become president. But when he was president, he allowed, even though he utilized it as a way to communicate to his voters, it was a trap. It was a cyber reality that he should never enter again. It was a world, it was like Tron for apoplectic, disgruntled, angry, seething, fuming, hysterical, fanatical, morally superior, indignant liberals. And every tweet, every provocative statement that he wrote served to galvanize opposition, to bolster to bolster the resolve of his adversaries. It did not do anything to prop up or to increase his popularity within the Republican Party. His accomplishments did that. Record low unemployment, the beginning of peace between North and South Korea, Abraham Accords, allocated more funding to historically black colleges and universities than any president ever. That's a fact. Signed prison reform legislation. He got a greater percentage of the non-white vote than any Republican in 60 years. Everything they tried to do against him didn't work. They said he was this big racist. He worked with Putin. He pressured Zelensky. None of it was true. He was acquitted twice. Even what took place, look, there shouldn't have been protests that day. Those 5 people should be alive today. That woman should be alive. Notice the left doesn't talk about an unarmed woman losing her life. I love the duplicity there also. But Twitter was a forum that did not help President Trump, and it hurt President Trump, especially the last year and a half of his presidency. Because it was like playing a game at Foxborough with deflated balls and, oh, I like how that sounds, and 20 degrees below zero. It was like playing a game at, at Buffalo in the 90s with 10, 20 degrees below zero and wind and sleet and rain and snow. Lambeau Field. You pick the venue, okay? It was like pitching in Coors Field in the 90s. It was like, I don't know. It was the worst. It was not made for President Trump. And you think that's counterintuitive. Well, of course it was made for. He's great at, evoking passions and emotions, but that's not good when you have all of media, all of Hollywood, intelligence operatives, social media companies all converging against you. And that serves to erase his accomplishments. I think that President Trump needs to remind everyone for the next 4 years, especially the next 2 years, and they'll probably let him on before 2022 because they want a distraction. They're bored now. They have nothing to talk about. They're not going after Biden. You know that. So they have nothing to talk about. They're completely bored. So Bill Gates, he probably sees the writing on the wall. He probably knows it behooves the Democratic Party to have President Trump back because it allows Democrats to deflect. It allows Democrats to say, so you see, he really meant this. And this is linked to this theory, and that theory is reality. Ideas that generally wouldn't become mainstream have become very popular because of Twitter. It is a cyber reality and world that amplifies emotion. And when you have pretty much all of media singing the same tune, it's very difficult for President Trump to actually get his point across through that kind of medium. Through that kind of cyber venue. Twitter is not reality, but it's reality to the lives of a great many liberal Democrats, of a great many progressives. There are policies that are good, noble, decent policies, like Medicare for all, for example. But in the real world, if there was no Twitter, you would have progressives start another political party and either join the Green Party or some kind of other political party and say, look, we're going to build this, take votes away from the Democratic Party and actually force them to implement the policies we want. With Twitter, you have AOC and Bernie Sanders, and all the people who align with AOC and Bernie Sanders saying, well, you can't. You have to allow the Democratic Party to go at its own speed. And if you try to push things and fracture the Democratic Party, well, we'll have no political power and influence, and then the Republicans will win. And do you want that? So what happens to Medicare for all? Can you vote on it at least? Even if it's not even if you don't have the votes, can you at least vote on it? No, but we can impeach Trump twice, 30 times, 40 times. That's for sure. We'll do that. But we definitely won't have a floor vote in the House. Can't have that. And it's a racket. It allows Democrats especially, like Republican voters, conservative voters, nobody gets hyped up or enthusiastic or passionate about any conservative value system, a Second Amendment. It's if you care about the Second Amendment, you don't go to Twitter to see what people are saying. I don't have a Twitter account, by the way. I haven't had Twitter for over 2 years now, going on 3 years. I haven't had Facebook for over 2 years, going on 3 years. I have a Twitter impersonator who's breaking the law. But I don't have Twitter. I don't have Facebook. Twitter is a place where people can hide behind profiles just to spew venom. Twitter is a place where it's a cyber reality where emotion can be retweeted. Logic and reason, not so much. Which is why AOC is doing very well on social media. Because she can go ahead and say, you know what? People are losing their lives because there's no Medicare for all, okay? And then Jimmy Dore will say, well, why don't we have Medicare for all? And then she'll say, well, you know what? There's a rule. There are rule changes that we can't really, there are rules, protocol. But impeachment, no problem. When they want to do something, they do it. When they don't want to do something, they don't do it. But see, most of the left lives in fear. I don't live in fear, thank God. You watch this channel, you don't live in fear. I support President Trump because of his accomplishments, because it's a moral imperative if you want to oppose the Lincoln Project, Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld people, which Bernie Sanders apparently wanted to get in bed with. And so AOC and Bernie Sanders voted alongside the Lincoln Project. What does that tell you about the American left? But see, I don't vote for President Trump because I'm afraid of anything or because I worship his personality. I vote because I wanted foreign policy. I wanted to reverse U.S. foreign policy, which is what he was doing. A great many people on the left utilize Twitter to show that, they're not supporters of President Trump, even though they're like one step from becoming supporters of President Trump. The left, like the Bernie Sanders voters, or I should say, people who are now asking the Democratic Party to implement Medicare for all, Green New Deal legislation, universal basic income, they're either going to become Green Party voters, or they'll say, you know what, the heck with it. With President Trump, at least we have a foreign policy. We don't have this militant regime change interventionist foreign policy with President Obama in Libya and Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld, Lincoln Project people. So they would become supporters of President Trump because of that. But Twitter prevents that from taking place because you have a whole bunch of people who can actually say, well, I don't like Trump, but I don't like the Democratic Party either. And I'm going to hold them accountable. I'm going to moralize and preach and sermons and give the, you know what? Well, you know what, Democrats, you know what this, or you know what, Pelosi, she doesn't care, okay? She doesn't care. You're not holding anyone accountable on social media. They don't care. It's a giant racket where Bernie Sanders and AOC just funnel votes back into the Democratic Party. But see, again, it's a finely tuned, well-oiled machine. It's the political machine now runs in cyberspace. It used to be Tammany Hall. Now a great deal of it runs in cyberspace. They can make the most absurd leaps of logic, and if it's retweeted enough, it gains traction. Ideas that wouldn't become mainstream are now becoming very popular because of Twitter. And that company's going to tank eventually. If they don't have President Trump and they continue like being this cauldron of negativity, which that's what it is, this boiling pot of discontent, this cyber reality that takes people, it removes your humanity. Twitter removes your humanity. You don't become, you're wasting, like people who are on Twitter are wasting their lives. You will derive no good from retweeting any sentiment, because at the end of the day, it'll become MySpace or it'll become a defunct, bankrupt platform. Even though the stock price is going up, they want a subscription-based service because they're not getting enough people who want the free service. The user growth is going to tank. They're very, very likely, I'm not saying they are, oh my God. They're very likely pulling an Enron with their disclosures of how many new users they have and monetizable daily users, the fabricated, nonsensical, or I should say the made-up fantasy of a metric. Monetizable users, yeah. And by the way, their share of the online digital ad spending is like microscopic. And it's not growing that fast at all. And their user base is probably not as large as they say it is. Because there's a whole lot of people with accounts around the planet, but people who they say that 80% of their user base is from outside the U.S. I don't buy it. And if that's the case, they're done as a company eventually. But anyway, I could be wrong. Could be the best stock in the world. Could be the best company in the world. I could be wrong. But it's not a place like what happened with President Trump is that his tweets overshadowed his presidency. They couldn't deal. If President Trump was not on Twitter, they would have to deal with his accomplishments, then have to deal with their failures. They couldn't deflect. They couldn't point to this imaginary monster, this orange menace, and say, look, we're obsessing over his tweets because his tweets are so horrible. Look what he said now. And again, President Trump shouldn't have insulted LeBron James. He shouldn't have insulted NFL athletes. He shouldn't have done those things. It did him no good. It did the country no good. What good did it do? What good did it do? If you disagree with somebody, you could just do it in a less abrasive manner because you fed the Democratic Party exactly what they needed to deflect from their look. They're governing now. They're collapsing before our very eyes. The left's breaking off. People are resigning. Lincoln Project is imploding. That's within a month. That's within 1 month without President Trump on Twitter. If he was on Twitter and he was like, yeah, you see, I told you Lincoln Project, you'd have all these people, oh yeah, well, you know what, you're not, and it would get them riled up and hyped up and enthusiastic and give them, like, each of Trump's tweets gave them life. They used his tweets to breathe. It was like air for them. And now you're like depriving them of that air, that sustenance. It was the worst thing that could ever have happened to President Trump, Twitter. Because, God bless him, one of the great presidents we've had, greatest president of my lifetime. But he at certain times, he had a problem controlling his personality, or he had a problem, foreseeing or predicting how his tweets would lead to his political demise, or, how his tweets would be detrimental to what he's trying to accomplish, and in many ways to the country. Not so much his own fault. They obsessed on purpose, and they took many things that he said out of context, or they pretended to be outraged when they've said and done infinitely worse. But there were things he shouldn't have said, and there were things that he didn't have to say on Twitter, because he already had people who were just going to vote for him. That didn't help him among his voters. He actually needed to kind of bridge and reach out to people, that were like on the fence pertaining to him. And he didn't do that. And Twitter was a platform that allowed Democrats to gain strength with every one of his tweets. Now they're bored. You watch, they're probably, I'm not predicting this, but they're probably, well, I guess I am, but they're probably going to let him back on before 2022 because they want him to deflect from the likely the endless controversies and scandals that Democrats are going to have in the next 2 years. They want him to deflect. They want to sensationalize all, his tweets and everything. So if anyone watches this channel that has the ear of President Trump, tell him never to get back on Twitter. And I would even say don't even get back on Facebook. He wrote that letter the other day. If he comes out with a letter, or if he comes out with what he should do is have who's the Barstool Sports gentleman, the owner of, he interviewed President Trump. He should have people who are Trump supporters interview him, or favorable, like way CNN fawns over Biden. He should have journalists or business leaders who like him interviewing him, and he could get his message across that way or through the letter that he released. Give me your thoughts below, or whatever. There's like a million different ways to get your point across without social media. Like a million, especially if you're a former president. You don't need Twitter or Facebook. It's designed for Democrats, not designed for President Trump. It might have helped him initially getting to become president, but it's not designed now for President Trump. I mean, just the whole, caution labels or fact-checking, misleading. How many misleading or false statements did Pelosi or Dianne Feinstein or Adam Schiff or all of them make? John Brennan, Clapper, all of these people, Comey. How many times did they accuse Trump of working with Russia? Where was Twitter telling you, oh, here's the context, this is misleading? There's no direct evidence. Why are they saying that he worked with Russia? Where was that? It was nowhere to be found. Steele dossier, when BuzzFeed published the Steele dossier, there were no, on the tweets, there were no, caution labels. Anyway, give me your thoughts below. Hit subscribe. Be here tonight for the live stream, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so very, very much. About 6 p.m. tonight. Thanks, everybody.